The things that I'm going to be asking and talking about are very, very, very simple. There's only a few actionable items that are on the list here. Um,
Okay.
the way that we normally function is that we put a website basically on the server or on a server that can connect to an ODBC driver that can connect to your database.
Okay.
Does that make sense for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the things that need to be adjusted or moved at all in doing something like that are just the ports. There's a data port 443 that we would use for the connection for the VistaQuote application. If 443 isn't available on that particular server that you choose, because it could be any server that you choose that can get an ODBC connection and then connect to your database, right? So
Okay.
with other programs, things like that are out in the industry, like Quantum, Quantum has Quantum client users, and those client users can have a network connection to the database, and thus we can install on a machine that has that because that gives an ODBC connection there. The application can run on 443 on port 443, or we do 8443 just because it's a little easier and it avoids some of the other default things that run through 443.
Okay.
What will be happening is that we will create a site in IIS. This site will have a port open 443 that allows us connection from our what we call a broker. Our broker will connect to your ODBC driver. Your ODBC driver will then have connection to the database. Thus, we can speak to the database, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
That makes
It
perfect sense.
should make perfect sense. Now, I'm not sure if we're using images out there specifically. Images are used, they take pictures of plane parts, things like that, that come along, and there's normally maybe even a database full of pictures or a folder full of pictures that are being used to associate with what you're selling, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Hmm.
If that exists, then we would need to install what we have is just a FileZilla FTP server, and we use ports 21 and we use ports 5000 through 5010. Now, ports 21, 5000 through 5010, and 443 all need to be opened up on the firewall,
Hmm.
on the machine, and
Okay.
on the router so that we can get through externally.
Okay.
So when you do that, we ask that we don't want you to be wide open to the world on those ports necessarily. So you can whitelist that on the router to 2 IP addresses. The 2 IP addresses are our VistaQuote application that will be doing the connection, and our broker server, which we use to be able to do maintenance on the broker
Okay.
pieces of it. So we have 2 machines that are in there. And those 2 IP addresses are on the document, one of the documentations that we sent out to you. I think that there should be 2 documents that you should have. One is going to ask you a bunch of questions on the IP addresses of the machine that you're going to choose for the
Hmm.
server, because we want to know that before we go to do the install. It makes the install so much smoother.
Hmm.
So once we go through that, we need to know what uh, the database that you're having. Is it 32-bit? Is it 64-bit? We need to know that because it changes how we communicate eventually when we get to get to that connection there. Um, Other than that, those are the real quick and dirty of it. When you go through that list, if you have questions, you can just ping us, but it should be fairly simple. We're going to ask for passwords for the database. We're going to ask for, what IP addresses are external so that we can connect to there. We're going to ask for what ports you actually chose in the end to open, because you can choose any other port that you want in these locations. If you want to change them from port 21 to port 55 for FTP, you go right ahead. You let us know what it is so that when we program the software to come in, we can change that and have that set.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. It's
All
pretty
right.
much the skinny of it.
I only have one question.
Yep.
The username and password for our corridor database, it's Oracle. Does it have to, can it just be a read only, or does it have to have read write? Is it going to be writing back?
It needs to have read write.
Okay.
We will be writing to that database because we will be updating things as things come along.
Okay.
We basically are a shortcut to that database, if you want to call
Okay.
it that.
Okay. That makes sense. Perfect sense. When do you need this information by?
Before the install is when we need this. We need this before we get on. We need to validate that the ports are actually open, or at
Sure.
least have you validate that the ports are actually open, because sometimes, you open a port and then forget the Windows firewall to open as well. Like things like that. So talking about these things ahead of time with the IT person, it helps the install go very smoothly.